Welcome everybody to Mentor Time. This, interestingly enough, is a topic that I thought maybe late 2023. When I looked back, we actually talked about this in early 2022 about a portfolio career. We haven't done it recently, but it's been in the news. So we'll get started. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about things that I could demonstrate that would show why we're going on this topic to build a career portfolio. And I realized when I was a teenager, when my baby sister was a year and a half in this picture, this is what we had, black and white. This was video, black and white video film, and the pictures weren't any less blurry. Suddenly, 2 months later, we've got color film. Now, it's still blurry, but you can see much more. You can see Sarah's crawling on a purple. Robin's got a sweater on. I think that's me in the back, but it could be my sister just next to me. You can tell a lot more than you could tell from the black and white picture. You notice that in the black and white picture, they're next to white appliances, and Sarah's in a light colored dress and the wallpaper is white. So it's hard to get any definition out of it. So I'm curious, just put in the chat, one, if this has happened to you, that you suddenly realize the difference between black and white film. Give me a 1 if you prefer black and white, or 2, color. There's no value judgment. I just want to get our brains engaged in thinking about this. Peter wants color. Ron says sometimes either. Color for Stephanie, and it depends for Incha. There are reasons to do both. Mary, both of them. Multidimensional careers, which is what a portfolio career is, need visuals to convey you. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh, okay, but don't we already do that? We're on screens all the time, it seems. But here's what I hear from people about careers that involve the word portfolio. People are saying, so why is this happening now? We're not out of COVID, but we've had a lot of experience. Look at the number of people waiting in line. The supply and demand in business is unpredictable. And if she convinced her boss to hire a second person to help her make the coffees while she's at the cash register, for sure, it would go out of style at that coffee shop and people would be down the street somewhere else. So companies are very uncertain in a very short-term way about cash flow and the constantly changing economic situation. Most companies want to hire contractors, people who are being told you may not be an employee again, are telling me, but Sue, I don't want to run a business. I want to be an employee. Many of us are going to be running businesses. It'll be more common, but it'll be probably a little bit different from what you're thinking about. And I get it. It's not necessarily preferable, but I don't want you to feel hamstrung about that. So I want to make sure that we understand as we go through today what a portfolio career is, and then what a career portfolio means and why you might want to do it. And we always end mentor time with what should you do, which are the assignments I'll give you to take forward, things you can help yourself to apply the learning. So let's get started with, I have a portfolio career. I'd like to know from all of you in the chat, one, that you feel at some point in your life you have had a portfolio career before we start defining it. Or 2, if you've never had a portfolio career. And Ron has, I have, Mary has, Chelsea has, Incha has, Peter has. Yes, it turns out many of us have had that experience. Nada hasn't, but you've been piecing together work now, so maybe you could consider that. I went to the Portfolio Collective and figured that would be a good place to start when I searched for images and comparisons about work in a traditional job or an employee job versus portfolio work. So they had like a little infographic. I'm going to build it slowly because I didn't agree with everything they put in there. So it's true that one main job meant you had one source of income. That's where, when I was employed, I worked and got income from that. I had benefits. Yes, that's true. Portfolio work is multiple sources of your income for sure. But we'll be talking about various things where people have main jobs and also have side hustles. So again, this infographic from 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, doesn't take all of this into account. And then they said in traditional work, you work for someone else, and in your portfolio work, you work for yourself. They didn't quite get a check mark because you work for a variety of others. Your clients will be much more varied than you might have had in the work you did in an employee situation, where you're working with clients, but it's more often in teams or in a business approach where you're doing big projects or little projects with one or two funders, for example. And yes, you set the agenda, meaning you'll take on the work you want to take on or are able to take on. But at the same time, you use different skills for different clients. So you're using work for yourself in a way that would be how you might have done it, for example, if you were an employee and in a project management team, maybe we're leading something. In that sense, you would be in a way working for yourself, meaning working for everyone else. I'm not talking about income. I'm just talking about the work that comes across. Again, I had to put a comment on it's office-based versus remote. It's not that simple anymore. And in some cases, people who are contractors are working on site for the company that's hiring them because they either have to be there, or if you're working in a secure environment and you have a security clearance, you have to go to where the secure environment is. You can't do your work from home, but you still could be considered working for yourself. But it's basically a mix of places. I have friends who consult. They do remote work. They do a lot of virtual teaching. They get on a plane and do keynote addresses and go do workshops with clients. Sometimes they drive. These dichotomies aren't absolute. And finally, they say that if you're an employee, there's a repetitive grind every day. Not in the world I was in. I had 1 or 2 days out of 10 years where I might have been bored. When you are a consultant doing portfolio work, you definitely have every day is different, but I maintain that happens in almost any work relationship, irrespective of whether you're a paid employee or you're doing a portfolio career. The difference comes from, in the work that I did anyway, and probably many of you, is you were doing different services for different clients. I know some of you, and I know your histories. Even if you are in a certain division, you had different people, country programs, regional programs that you worked with. So I want to know in the chat, what kinds of titles have you heard for people that have portfolio careers? I mentioned a couple of them already. Consultant Incha, thank you, yes. Same from Ron. Chelsea says consultant, freelancer, entrepreneur, yes. Project lead, I hadn't thought about that. Mary says consultant, freelance, yes. Yes, you're all right. Nada says consultant, thank you. All right, well, keep those coming. Here's the several I came up with. And I was curious as I started to look at this, because it seemed like a couple of years ago, everybody talked about themselves as a multi-hyphenate. And that didn't really resonate with me, partly because it's a long term and you have to explain it to people. Turns out it started in the entertainment industry. So I was trying to figure out how to show you why and how these terms come up, and they aren't necessarily interchangeable. So I thought the best thing to do is go to Google Trends. So freelancer, this is a 5-year period. Freelancer, it looks like the bump was about the end of 2022 and early 2023. And it's been maintaining itself around the 50% rate. Now the trends mean Google searches are showing up, the words are showing up as interested. Yes, self-employed falls under this category too. And so thank you for that clarification. Absolutely. So I'm going to build a little data viz for you. So then I went to the next term and said side hustle. And I actually thought it might have started earlier because I remember mentoring someone before COVID who had a side hustle and asked me when she should start talking about it. But the peaks, meaning getting up towards 100%, were in late 2021 to 2022, and again late 2022 to 2023. So it looks like maybe New Year's resolutions. I don't know. I'm just reading approximately those dates. And when we go to solopreneur, it's been climbing from 25% to it hitting COVID in the last year. So I would say because of the US elections for sure, but also for the last year and a half with the economy. Some people thought the economy was doing well, others didn't. People wanted more protection, and there were layoffs then. We know from the quarterly trends of work that I do every 3 months, we are seeing layoffs each time. And then there was a bump again, especially going into the new year in the US, and enough said on that. So now we can see contractor, and that's been pretty steady at about the 70s, so 60s to 70s in the graph until very recently. If you remember, in the December, of course, you remember intimately in December mentor time, I talked about a report, which I'll show you again today, that said there's more companies want to hire more contractors. So there's a huge bump now. So now we're going to the next four. Entrepreneur has been steady up and down from 100% to 50%. And I would say that this is the one term people use that is less likely to be used by most of you all that I work with, because most of us view this as the real startup mentality. But there's a similar high trend, and then it's got very low valleys. Consultant, on the other hand, peaked for some reason at the end of 2022, but hangs in around 50%. And there's only a little bit of climbing in the last few months. That could be due to the late 2022 is when COVID started. We had that period in 2022 when things were reopened sort of mostly, and then Omicron hit, and then we were back to being careful. Or it could be just spurious. Again, end of the year stuff says to me, New Year's resolutions, changing jobs, whatever. I was very curious about the word fractional because this has now taken on, in my mind, the way people generally use it is for C-suite employees, and fractional was a way to differentiate having a consultant or contractor role. But basically we're a small company. We don't need a full-time CEO or COO. We want a fractional role. So they hire you for 50% time or something, whatever. It seems to have had its peak much earlier than I expected, just before and during COVID, and is still only at about 75%. And yet when people talk about portfolio careers, especially people 50 and above, they talk about fractional roles for themselves. Yeah, these are just informative, so you understand the range of the way people are describing their work, as well as as Insha asked about, self-employed is what you're doing, and the mechanism is mostly what we're talking about. Multi-hyphenates had a very interesting pattern. To me, was amazing. It went from 0 to almost 100 and then didn't do anything from the beginning of COVID to several months later. But each time it keeps having peaks and then real valleys. And now it looks like, it's hard to tell, but it looks like it's maybe on a downward trend. As I said, 2 years ago, everybody seemed to be using this. So this was the report that I showed you in December, Freelancers on the Rise, Adapting HR Strategies. This was all about HR needs to get ready to deal with people who are now contractors, not employees. And we also talked about the return to office article from Fast Company, where they described locations not necessarily hampering your ability to get a promotion. And these were the things that were listed as important to make sure you could keep your boss informed about. Key work results, how you collaborate with colleagues, over communicate. So I want to give you a quick view. I went over this again before, so some of you may have seen it, but here's a visual of how multidimensional work goes on or how your career portfolio unfolds. And everybody here said that they've done some version of it. And I remember what mine was always hard because, like most of us, someone would engage me and then I'd be close to getting ready to travel and they'd say, oh, we have to delay it. And the delay would be something I'd already committed to for a timing. So it makes it difficult. These trends are the way your work rolls out. It might be concurrent or in parallel that you're carrying two assignments, two companies at the same time. It could be sequential with little or no overlap. So you do work for one client for a long time, maybe pick up a new one as the other one's ending, or there may be a timing separation. You could have periodic work where I know someone who's on a retainer to do something 4 times a year. So this is what her 4 times a year looks like. And the big gap is because she takes the summer off with her family, and that's by her choice. So visually, this would look like I forgot to correct my font on the left, but the dark green's in office, the light green's remote, just to get an idea of what you're doing. This person at first must have been in grad school, looks like they were a research assistant, then took on a teaching assistantship at the same time, and then a little bit later started a job as an interviewer. Then it looks like that person decided to go full-time into being a consultant and had 2 different contracts, and each of them overlapped each other for a little bit of time. And finally, they decided to get a job or were recruited for a job and became a research director. So there's no one way that this work happens. And that puts, again, a lot of burden on you. But the ability to tell your story, I'm giving you these visuals because that's what we're talking about today. When you build a career portfolio, you have to be able to be descriptive about what and how you've managed your work. This is just the final comment from that December meeting. The Ripple report I showed you a minute ago, the cover of it said 92% of companies plan to increase their use of freelancers in 2024 and beyond. So it's announced, it's a big shift, and they're doing it so employees aren't sitting on their bottom line. So for me, if you're in flexible work arrangements, if you're not sure where your next step is, to be prepared for you to be in control, and I'm all about you being in control of your professional development, I want you to think about a career portfolio. Now, I'm not the only one who's talking about this, but I am one of the few who's looking for something more than this. When I searched on Google to look for career portfolios, and I'll put these in the references if you want to see the link results that I used. This was the AI view from Google you now get, showing all the things it needs. Put a note in the chat. What does this look like to you? It's a lot of stuff. What does the stuff look like? I'm trying to see if you can do my work for me and tell me what I'm going to be saying next. See if you can read my mind. What do these have in common? Structured and categorized, looks like a LinkedIn profile, could be a CV. Okay, yeah, you're all getting the idea. It's a lot of stuff that's written that's on a 2-dimensional page, which is all we really have these days to work in. A bit like LinkedIn, yes. It's a lot of stuff, but it's also, if we look, then Indeed said, oh, these are the elements of a career portfolio. It's stuff, a lot of it repeats stuff that's on your long CV, but it's also all very document oriented. Many of the articles I read said, oh, I think I gave you the commonality. I already gave you the punchline. These all are basically piles of paper. They're now our electronic documents. I'm still seeing some universities that I looked at their recommendations. They're saying get out a binder, make sure you have separator tabs, put post-it notes on the 3 things you want to feature. This assumes that people are going to be handing someone this in an interview or in a promotion meeting. All of this is to say, we are drowning in information, and we ourselves are drowning in what and how we're trying to communicate with people. So if you had your druthers, how would you make your portfolio? Just stick a note in the chat about what would you want to do for your portfolio? There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious about what you all are thinking about. You probably thought about it at maybe not calling it a career portfolio, but thinking about ways you could convey things differently. Peter says a bit like LinkedIn. Okay. Put photos, field work, facilitating sessions. Sheila says that's an excellent idea. Ron says focus on the changes and benefits to the clients. Yes, exactly. Love that. Mary says use visuals when possible and highlight your strongest work. Excellent. So I did find some ways, if you all are continuing, that's great, to take all this stuff. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. We're more than our resume. We know that. We're even more than our LinkedIn profile, but we don't always have the chance to show that. So I have my little brown thing up there as the mentoring award I got back in 2009. It's one line in my CV. It would never make it into a resume, probably. But I thought about the visual part of it. When I read my Google Lit review, different companies and colleges were talking about portfolios. They were saying, if you're creative, like a photographer or a sculptor, you want to have your online portfolio with pictures. And I'm sitting there a couple days ago yelling at the screen like, yeah, and so do the rest of us need that. So this is not rocket science, but I thought I would put together something to show you how it could work. In the past, I worked with a speaking coach for over 2 years, and she and others have speaker sheets. I never really got mine done, but they're basic advertisements, one-page things. I'm all about landscape because when we open things on screens now, they're in landscape. So I made 6 panels. Why 6? It keeps me, Sue, from writing too long, but it also, and I'm going to show you, takes advantage of some of the scannability and readability. So if we look at the top left, that's the most important thing. When someone opens a document, their eyes go to the top left of the screen. We read left to we start at the top. So brief intro, I'm the important whatever, and maybe a link to your resume. And then under that is the last 3 roles or 2 roles, each with 2 achievements. Again, there is no rule to this. It was just my thinking putting it together. In the middle, I put your key projects and the top 3 skills for each. Again, visually trying to group information for the reader. And then down below, your key products. So things you've written, things you've presented on, being in a podcast, whatever. And on the right is like sentences 5 and 6 in your bio para, everything else. Maybe one big photo, as Sheila said when she was facilitating maybe her workshop that she did a couple months ago. Awards, languages, testimonial, contact information. So I decided to do what I always ask you all to do, and I decided to put something together to see what you think. I put a band at the top because it would make my name stand out on the top left corner. You'll notice the top left corner flows into the second part because in landscape, people don't like sentences that go across a line all the way to wherever. And even going across 2/3 of the screen is more difficult. So make chunks of thirds. I have my picture there of me staged working with someone on my phone. I almost never do that. I do it in my office. Bottom left, my last 2 jobs, and put the logos in. I didn't say that in the portfolio template I gave you, but I put my photos in. Attractive colors, offsets the title, just a way to encourage interest. I picked 3 of my projects, a scientific article in the top left and a poster, and then my YouTube. And then on the bottom, I put my LinkedIn QR and a couple places I've been speaking. So why does this work? First of all, almost everyone on here has heard me say the left-hand margin's your best friend, right? So we're going to see people scanning down the left-hand margin when you open it. And that's why I put the order of those 2 important things there. Then we go on to a little bit more important information. In your case, I said you might want to use key projects and skills that you've used in each, no more than 3. Remember, no long lists. Down in the middle, this shows if I wanted to, this article was Stephanie's here today. Stephanie and I, with John Iskander and a couple other authors, wrote that, oh, so long ago, Stephanie, 2017, I think it was, on structured mentoring in the workplace. So the layout of it, without even knowing the title, the layout of it for those of us that read scientific articles says, oh yeah, I recognize that. The poster, it's an old poster, but it's a poster session from a conference. And I put my YouTube channel in because the videos were colorful and it shows that I do presenting. Again, no rocket science. And then we go over here where here's the human interest. You know how they always say you can be interesting in your cover letter? You still can't be this interesting in your cover letter. You can choose what you want people to know about you at a glance. And for a bonus, because I have the lovely Chrome extension called Go Full Page, I decided to put my whole LinkedIn profile there. Now, no one can read it, but they know from that top banner, that from the banner right at the top with my headshot and a line across it, everybody will recognize, many people will recognize that's a LinkedIn profile. If you didn't want that, you could make a carousel that looks like an achievements portfolio is what I'm calling it. It has the same effect. Maybe you have 4 panels. The first one is your intro thing, put your headshot in there. And then I just did varying colors because I saw a carousel someone did a couple days ago on a topic, and they used dark blue with very light white and terrible font on there, and I could hardly read it. So watch for old lady eyes. But each achievement could be the focus of each panel, and you could describe it with special skills and the little white boxes. Maybe you have a visual you want to put in there or a link or something that helps people catch who you are. All of those are meant to be quick summaries. So where do you think you're going? You don't have to choose what I've done, but I'm just curious. Does one or the other appeal to you? Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for the layout and the visuals comment. I just wanted to give you ideas, 2 ideas to build your own visuals. Tell me if you like the top left, number 1, or the bottom right, number 2. There's no value judgment. You can tell me you like 0 of them because I am not a good graphic designer, but I try to use my data viz principles for this. Top left, okay, great. Thanks, Stephanie. Sheila likes top left, bottom right. I think, Peter, for you, I could see that. You like both. It's true, Ron, depends on the situation. And Insha, that's a good point. The bottom red one's visually clean. It's much more consistent, and there's going to be fewer words on there and even more visuals and more white space. Yes, you're right. I know, and I've tried to put as much white space in as I could in the more complex one. All right, so tell me in the chat, I want to know whether or not you're going to commit to trying one out. You don't have to share it, but Ron and I would love it if you'd share it with us and let us know how it goes. Stephanie says yes, great. Insha says yes, great. And if you want the template for this, I'll email you when I send out the link to the recording. I will email a link to these 2 slides. So if you want to use any variations of the templates, you can. Thank you, that's great. And Ron and I are happy to receive them. We will share the templates and want you to start thinking about it because In many ways, this for me is like when we talked about Notebook LM being our portfolio analysis of ourselves a couple weeks ago. This is a way to then visually summarize things, catch people's interest, remind them before a meeting, oh, I'm looking forward to meeting with you. Here's a quick snapshot of who I am, so that they don't have to dig out, where's that 2-page resume and what did Sue name it when she sent it to me? And now they've got something interesting to talk about. I do not recommend, by the way, that you put on your hobbies or anything else like that. I think we're finally over resumes that have, I love kayaking and walking on the beach and writing poetry. Peter says, how would you suggest we use them when we make them? I think that there are infinite ideas. You could attach it to a cover letter. You could send it, you could post it on your LinkedIn. I know the speakers that I follow have on LinkedIn, and in LinkedIn, in your contact information, you're allowed up to 3 URLs. You could put it in your about section, not the visual, but you could put the link to it there. You could put it in your featured section, for example, and explain it. Here's my career portfolio summary, or whatever you want to call it. The only reason that I'm asking you to share it with Ron and me is just so that you can get some feedback, because it's very hard to put the effort into creating something when it doesn't go anywhere. I sat and created my own portfolio. I mostly filled it in for you all because I knew I was doing this talk, and I thought, stop giving them templates. Let's give them how hard it really is. And it wasn't that easy to do. And Ron, you're right. You didn't say this about me, but you said it as what we need to do. I needed to talk more to what the client needs. All right. And Insha says, in terms of the portfolio, can we use the different distinct skills within one job as a portfolio? Yes, Sue is not making up rules. This is why I'm presenting this idea for you to take a 1-page thing and try to figure out, what do you want to show and why? That's why you're in charge of your own professional development. I think that's a great idea, Insha, and we welcome seeing your work. You should be able to, I think you should see Ron's email on the periodic messages I send out, but if you don't, just send it to me and I'll forward it to Ron. This is not ATS format. This is not your resume. No, this is a supplement. This is something that's more user-friendly. It's not meant to be a visual CV. Those do not pass the ATS, and they never have. And in fact, Sheila, you remember a couple of years ago, Sheila and I were talking about portfolios, and Sheila made something in Notion. Sheila, I went to find it and I couldn't find the link that let me into yours because I have a different Notion now. Sheila did make a portfolio for her projects that she had been doing before her new job and since. So this is to give you ideas about how to make your descriptions of yourselves, telling your story, more visual, and to have those things prepared. So you can say to someone, oh, let me give you this snapshot along with my resume. I don't know that you'd hand it out in a network meeting, but maybe that's better than your resume. It's at the bottom of About Me on LinkedIn. I never thought to go there. Thank you, Sheila. Sheila, you did it within 2 weeks of us talking about something on Mentor Time. You sent it and said, oh yeah, I'd already started it, Sue. So again, the takeaway is you can use multi-visuals, because when you have a multi-dimensional career, you need to convey you and what you deliver in your portfolio career, not just in 1 or 2 things. A few references, and I'm going to go back to the takeaway because it's more pleasant, and ask Ron for comments and then open it up for chat.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I think I can see all sorts of applications, and often I'm wishing that I had captured information differently in my early career. And it's funny because when we were talking about having a portfolio career, and I thought back, actually, while I had one employer in the military, I was on a portfolio career because I was a consultant often. And so I often had many clients, and I would be put in to be a troubleshooter. And so my projects were varied and the clients were different and all the rest of it. So it met all the categories, regardless of who paid the bills. And so I I've often wished I had captured information early on and captured it in a way that I would be able to illustrate. And I like this approach. I've talked to Sue before about using portfolios. And when I was at the community college, it was a portfolio college, and it was exactly what Sue demonstrated, which is a little binder and all the rest of it. I really like this idea because of that you're showing, Sue, because we're in an electronic age. And so this becomes, and I can actually see this a hyperlinked document, and I can see a very complex picture being presented with this one of those templates that you use as an overview, which then would have similar layers underneath it and so on. And that's me. I tend to overcomplicate things. But I could see that, especially if you're going to do this as an HTML document of some kind using Notion or some tool, that you could actually do a pretty comprehensive hybrid document, hyperlinked document. In part, I guess you can do that on LinkedIn, but I'm thinking that you can even do better than that. But anyway, thanks very much, Sue. This was great.
Thank you, Ron. That was very helpful. And I love the fact, as you said, we all, as employees, are often working with multiple clients, or we're always managing work. The outcomes are not necessarily coming directly to us. All right, unmute if you have a question. Stephanie, you're unmuted.
No, you answered it about in terms of where to put it, and thanks for the additional comment from Sheila about putting it at the bottom of LinkedIn under the About section.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Anybody else?
I
Peter?
was wondering, is there anything about like people having companies being worried about people taking on too many contracts, or if you have more than one, do they consider it like having two jobs or being overemployed or anything like that?
When you are working for yourself, you mean?
Yeah, if you're working for yourself and if you take on two contracts, because you showed your timeline that sometimes they overlap and things like that.
Companies aren't allowed to ask you that. A contractor relationship is a business relationship, and usually you get paid on deliverables, not on being an employee who's supposed to contribute to the company. I know that's a fine line, but if they ever asked you, for example, Peter, you've just taken on an extra week in your travel, and that happened to coincide with some work you were supposed to be doing for someone else. They never had dates, and then they call you, we got the dates, Peter, it's the third week you're going to be away. And you have to say to them, I'm going to be away, you'll have to slip it a week or not. No one ever asked, and as a manager, I never asked someone, do you have the bandwidth to take this on? It's, in my view, contractors, consultants, solopreneurs, it's your responsibility to manage your bandwidth. So if you want to work 120%, that's no one else's business except your own. And many people do that.
Just a comment on that as well is that when I went out into consulting, I decided to form a limited company just for several reasons, but that's that I decided to go that more formal route. And at that point, once you're now technically an entrepreneur in that you have a business, and so now you're operating a business. So getting the getting the job done is about, as you said, Sue, it's the deliverables. Are the deliverables delivered on time, etc. Who actually does the work may not matter. And in fact, in my case, I occasionally had individuals that worked for me that helped get the work done. And so is my cheating? No, it's part of the portfolio of work that I made sure happened. And I worked with others to get it done, what you do when you're working with other people inside of a workplace, but to do it. And so I guess the question then becomes, is somehow are you restricted from employing others in order to help you get the job done? And that would be an interesting question as an addition to what Peter is asking, because I think most of us, when we're thinking, oh, I'm a solopreneur, therefore I am the only employee. But it's possible that you might bring in other consultants who might end up doing it. So that would just broaden your ability to be a successful solopreneur, consultant, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's the problem with none of the titles. Consultants can hire employees to be part of their team. People have VA, virtual assistants. Contractors almost always have a stable of people they work with, depending on how big the business is. So again, it's not up to the company to police that. except in some of the legal things. For example, companies in the US may not hire a contractor in a role for more than 6 months each year, because then everybody's nodding, because then it becomes an employee. But other than that, how and in what way you get your business done, companies want to do what's easiest, and marking off a deliverable and paying you for that is easy, is only slightly harder for them than paying you as an employee, and you have less implication on the bottom line.
I think you've answered the question. It was similar to Peter about having timelines that are linked for different projects and how that would come across for a recruiter or an employer, but I think you've answered it. Then I just wanted to say that for my portfolio, I wanted to link it on LinkedIn, but I could not unless you pay for it. So I just put the link below the About Me section on LinkedIn, but I'm thinking now it's long overdue for an update. But I think after updating, or even on posts, at the end of the post, I can check my portfolio here
Yeah.
and put the link there just to get visibility with recruiters.
You can also, Sheila, you can add to your featured section on LinkedIn, you can add a link directly and then just take a thumbnail of the Notion portfolio or part of it. So you could put it in your featured section without even a post, I'm pretty sure. And that on a free account. I only have free account. I don't pay LinkedIn for anything after 21 years.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, let me know if you have any problems, but for sure you can put links to all sorts of things there now. Great,
Just a-
Sheila, thank you. Ron?
Yeah, just an additional kind of comment. You've talked a little bit about the definition of an employee versus a contractor. And of course, that depends on jurisdictions. For example, here in Canada, to be technically a contractor as opposed to an employee, you have to be responsible for the output, but not the means of the work. In other words, if you're being supervised within the company, then you're not a contractor. It's artifice, and it's all about trying to avoid paying you company benefits and all the other stuff. And so there's that kind of a challenge. And so certainly in Canada anyway, if you are a contractor, and I don't know that there's a restriction about how long the contract could be, and except within a department or something if you're doing government work. But the idea would be is that you have a contract, you are responsible for the deliverables, and you're not expected to be directly supervised except within the confines of the contract. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge. But I think in having a portfolio where you're capturing all of this great stuff and being able to share it using some kind of electronic means, I think this is just great. I really like it.
Any last comments or questions before I ask Ron to close the meeting? All right, Ron, it's all on you.
I was filling in our various appointments as to when the next time we get together for mentor time. And my calendar says it's on the 26th. Of this month. And so I look forward to meeting with the rest of you near the end of the month. And this was great. Thank you, Sue, for all the effort you put in it. It's great to see so many people dropping in. And I trust that things will go well, and we'll meet again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. So glad you all came, and we'll see you next time. I'll be sending out a periodic message in a couple weeks before the next one, so you'll get a reminder.